You need to surf the wave and understand where history is moving, be on the right side of history, and I always knew that what we're doing is on the right side of history. So that's where this confidence is coming from for me.
Hello and welcome to Things I've Learned, the podcast from Mix Interiors, the show in which we explore how the inner worlds of designers, architects and creatives shape the world around us. I'm Harry McKinley. There's a phrase I enjoy: your utopia could be my dystopia. For me, it's an important way of framing design and architecture because it reminds me that there isn't one idea of the perfect product or space or building or even city, that we all view the world through a different lens. And someone's vision of progress, their vision of the future, could look very different to mine. One of the great questions of design then is, how do we chart a course to that future together? Across this season, I've been incredibly privileged to be in conversation with some of the creative industry's most accomplished names, exploring everything from the future of AI to the power of radical originality. But it feels fitting to round out this first season of Things I've Learned with one of design's boldest thinkers and most visionary leaders, Patrik Schumacher, principal of Zaha Hadid Architects. Patrik, you don't just imagine the future, you help create it. So tell me, what does your utopia look like?
Well, I disagree, first of all, with the premise that it is wholly subjective. Yes, there might be different explicit recipes of how one reaches somewhere, but I think there's something which many of us share, that the city is, a machine which generates prosperity or contributes to a societal process which generates material freedom, prosperity, and people might not be aware what this requires, and their likes and dislikes might not align with what would deliver prosperity for all. So there would be therefore a discourse, not only I like this, you like that, but arguing what would be for the commonweal, what would be the city which generates the most prosperity for all. So my vision of that future prosperity engine, the city, to enhance that, is based on the idea of intensifying communication, bringing knowledge economy clusters together. That's where the prosperity is being generated. Even in agriculture, it's where, biotech innovations, all sort of tech innovations, the innovation potential of the technical systems by which we kind of reproduce our lives has been enormously increased. We can reprogram the robots, upload new software service apps. So the absorption of innovation is enormous. So we all need to get involved and it would pay to get involved, to do research, development, marketing, financing. And for that, we need to have much more intense form of communication than we used to need. And we should therefore live, work, entertain, and educate in the city, come together in mixed uses, in synergy clusters. And that means complexity, that means density, that means dynamism. We should learn to love that kind of metropolitan life and look and feel of a buzzing city life and be right in the midst of it. And that's the sensibility we need to acquire. And the architecture which fits into this will also be complex, continuously evolving. There's no complete symmetry, proportion, neither in the city shape nor in the individual architecture, because they keep networking with each other and accumulating and rewiring it to each other in a kind of dense matrix of interaction. And there are some examples of this, at least in terms of the dynamism and density, which is, for instance, the Square Mile, the financial center in London, where I think you feel it's very high value. It has new buildings popping up all the time. It retains its historical alleys and gems as well. Although architecturally, I still have my doubts. There are too many different styles which come into play currently. We should be more converging to something which is more compatible and has the ethos of having buildings resonate with each other, because the inhabitants and end users want to work with each other, and that should be expressed in the architecture.
We're going to talk more about how design can change the world in just a moment, but before that, a word about our series partner. As a podcast listener, you understand the importance of great sound quality. So does Impact Acoustic, and that's why they've made it their business. Impact Acoustic create bespoke, design-led acoustic solutions for commercial spaces. They also know that, as a designer, you care about the planet. That's why Impact Acoustic's diverse range of products are not only beautiful and functional, they're also designed with sustainability at their core. For more information on Impact Acoustic, visit impactacoustic.com. So, we're going to talk about success, failure, and design, Patrik. But before we go into our first chapter, I wanted to go back to that built environment. You have lots of big ideas there. And I wanted to ask what you think it is about the vision of ZHA, the ideas that it expresses, that has made it really one of the world's most accomplished and recognized architecture practices.
So I think the popularity comes through because I think our designs are original. They have complexity. They become conspicuous. There's not something we aim at kind of superficially, but comes out of a rigorous methodology, an unprejudiced engagement with complex sites, and the requirement of connecting with exterior conditions. So we have a way of working which ends up looking different. We also work in ways which make our buildings look rather organic, as if they were embedding themselves like a new species in an ecology. They affiliate, they have complexity, but also unity. So they're not just a collage of disparate elements, but we're trying to integrate, make transitions between spaces, soft transitions. So we're learning from, for instance, a landscape where are different features, mountains, rivers, various species of the flora and fauna. So there's a lot of algorithmic tools and facility to make these resonances, soft transitions. We also intersect spaces, and that gives a very kind of unique look and feel. But I think there's a sense of beauty because we recognize an integral organic whole where we trust that there's an underlying integral functioning. We learned that in appreciating nature. A tree is maybe complex, but it has poise, it recognizes gravity. An environment recognizes the sun directions. Animals, we can see the difference between a simple worm, which is just segments repeating, and a snake, which has a front and end and up and down, where the tessellations migrate, and in outer form being similar, being much more sophisticated. But you also can see if you put the worm against the snake, the worm has no chance. He's going to be kind of gobbled up instantly, and the kind of higher degree of organization and intricacy and integralness of a more complex organism also spells superiority of functioning. And that's what I think our buildings express, but also that's our buildings actually deliver to some extent. Because when we use the latest technologies to optimize, for instance, for structural differentiation, for environmental adaptation with respect to sun directions, the internal flows of people gathering and moving about, we have relatively optimized artifacts, or we evolve also these forms. We're not inventing them by scribbling on a piece of paper or having a preconceived form, but we're evolving gradually, exposing them to forces of various types, to internal processes. We also make a lot of tests about legibility and recognizability. Are the different parts of the building, do we see them distinct enough so we can select amongst them? Do we also perceive that they belong to one complex, but this complex is well embedded and affiliates with the surrounding buildings? The long process of design. The design is, we're not shooting from the hip. And this kind of molding, shaping, and reshaping is like, that takes a year, sometimes 2 years to its final refinement, but quite a few weeks with many sifting to many options is like an evolutionary process. And the end result is we are finding and defining gradually and slowly a very well fitted form. And when you encounter such a form, you sense that something is going on, something you find curious and you trust. It's not something thrown together. any additional element, I mean, sometimes have to add a building, is very kind of carefully crafted in, because it is now joining a system which has many already highly evolved constraints. And when you add something, you have to kind of weave it in and work it in and allow it to participate in something. It's a bit like, when you throw a piece of garbage into the nature, it will stick out, and you do a few of those, your environment collapses into some kind of visual chaos, some kind of garbage spill. And that's what the city looks like, by the way. For the last 50 years, all we produce on a city scale is what I call garbage spill urbanization. We have also recipes how to overcome that, but we are doing it on a scale of a large urban complex where we have both the diversity and richness of variation, but also that kind of sense of organic integralness. That, I think, intuitively appeals. And that's why we are, by a huge kind of margin, the most popular architectural brand on the planet.
I love this idea that design is, in and of itself, an evolutionary process. I wonder if thinking about that and actually the evolution of the practice as a whole, if we can maybe rewind the clock a little bit and talk perhaps about what was your first experience of success and what did you learn from that moving forward? How has that affected the evolution of your work and the evolution of the studio?
Well, I can start with Zaha herself. Her first success is winning the school prize with her final project, and she was a star student. Then she became a teacher at the school and started to do a competition. And although she didn't win this was in 1980 for the Irish Prime Minister residence, it was amongst architects a kind of winning scheme. And already some of the features were visible then. The composition was rather complex, rather intricate, but also quite resolved. And she was expressing this with very, very detailed and intricate drawings. And so I discovered this work in the early to mid 80s when I was a student. And Zaha was already a hot ticket. She had won. Her real success was winning the Hong Kong Peak competition. She had no studio. She was working from home with students at the AA, the Architectural Association School of Architecture, where she was teaching as a young teacher. And she was beating all the top league architects of the world who were all kind of trying to win this competition. And she was the winner. And wow, if you compare these projects now, her project feels much more contemporary. She was portending the future then. But it took a long time for the studio to take these ideas and sketches and visions. I was joining as a student still in the mid 80s or late 80s rather, and it took us another 10 years before we started to winning competitions so that a chance to be built. There were some smaller things in between. So for me, it was 10 years participation, and for her, it was nearly 20 years before the first successes started to show up.
It's so interesting that you bring up Zaha and, of course, her formative role in shaping the practice. But for a very long time, it's been a shared vision. Now that Zaha is no longer with us, does it change how you think about success, your own success, the success of the practice, now that you're really leading in a singular way?
When Zaha passed away, sadly, in 2016, we had matured a lot already, developed a lot of tools, and were geared up computationally. We had already established that we can build some of these complex buildings. And the last 8 years since, we've been just growing further and did more and larger projects still. But the big transformation was during her lifetime, and we worked and established the organization. So there was no big revolution and transformation since her passing, because it was a collaborative process and continues to be a collaborative process. Of course, we miss her dearly. However, the legacy has been set on course so well in the years we had together that it's a kind of, I wouldn't say a self-runner, but nearly a self-runner which has its own DNA, its own spirit, its own processes, and many creative and energized collaborators, which many of them were our students. So before they joined the teams that have been working for us, sometimes 18 months as students, sometimes 12 months, sometimes several years. We haven't hired in very mature architects. We are always kind of built them up from the student bodies we've been encountering. And also it's very important to have these university studios to continuously research, explore, develop new ideas. Because when you're facing a client or you're giving a brief of a competition, they give you usually like 3-4 weeks, maximum 6 weeks. In that pace, it's hard to do really fundamental innovations. So for that, we use the university studios, and we had several of them. And there we can work on something for several years and then gradually bringing it into smaller projects, scaling up to larger projects. So by the time you're winning a project with some new ideas, we win these competitions after we've kind of explored and developed studies for 10 years.
But that idea of new ideas and innovation, for me, that really feels that it is the legacy of Zaha Hadid, both a person and a practice. You've spoken before about this idea that bold thinking and risk-taking are actually really important in the world of architecture. Do you think they're fundamental to success?
Absolutely. And I think you have to be patient. You have to show conviction. Throughout most of the 90s, we had a lot of setbacks and a lot of lost competitions. But we had persistent perseverance because we believed in what we could achieve. It was difficult at this time to visualize what we wanted to achieve. And towards the end of the 90s, when we upgraded our visualization tools and the software we were using became more sophisticated, we started to win these competitions. And then we kind of increased complexity further. That innovation is very, very important. There's also risk-taking clients who, and sometimes you can take more of a risk on a major cultural project where the kind of functionality isn't so tightly controlled like as it would be, let's say, in an office or in a mixed-use retail and residential and office environment, where it's more about an expression, a sensation. That's why sometimes we had these breakthroughs with cultural projects, with art projects, and you had also clients like, we didn't build a Guggenheim for Tom Prince, but a client like this who was challenging us and pushing us and wanting to do spectacular new visions of museums and structures. We need that. We need it on the client side. And also China was an arena where at the time when we entered China in the 2003, 2004, we won the Guangzhou Opera House, and then we found great clients like Seoul China. They were bold entrepreneurs. They wanted to do something fresh and different. There was more boldness, and we didn't have the track record. And it was a discovery journey where we learned, they learned, the construction industry learned. We made some mistakes, but we reached somewhere without risk-taking we could never have reached. And that's sometimes harder in a very mature environment like London, where we found it very hard. We had some glimpses of what we can do, the Aquatic Center at Olympic Park, or in Hyde Park, the Serpentine Gallery, but we haven't been allowed to do the bigger pieces. So there have been too many safe pair of hands in London, which kept getting these jobs. And this environment, this is very risk averse.
You made a nice statement there where you said, we believed we could do it. And actually, that's an uncommon quality. Where does your self-belief come from?
From Zaha's side, it was very intuitive, the conviction. And she also got always this early feedback. Wow, you're amazing. This is fantastic. And we won some of these competitions early on, selected to be one of 7 major architects for the MoMA show, the Constructorism show. She had shows at the ICA. So peer acknowledgements where other architects on juries, select you, give you a medal, who appreciate and love what you're doing. And for me, it was also an analytic approach, understanding where society is moving, this idea of the urban renaissance, of re-inhabiting the historic centers, the way you have to layer things in there, you have to open up buildings from the inside for having inter-awareness, intervisibility, communication, intensity of communication and collaboration in cities. And I've analyzed how the various stages of historical development, the way the modernism went into crisis, why did it go into crisis? Why did postmodernism come on the scene? And what was fresh and innovative about deconstructivism? And then we evolved into parametricism. And why was that captivating a whole generation of young architects? So to affiliate it with societal development, so the transformation of a Fordist mechanical mass production society, which was still compatible with socialism partially, into a kind of much dynamized post-Fordist network society, which also required the liberalization through neoliberal kind of the Thatcher-Reagan thing, and what that meant for the city and how architecture and urbanism has to kind of interface with these new conditions, and that you need to surf the wave and understand where history is moving, be on the right side of history, and I always knew that what we're doing is on the right side of history. So that's where this confidence is coming from for me, to say I can stay the course, this will come through. And for instance, parametrism, what we've been evolving, and not only Zahnid architects, but we're the mothership of a whole movement. The way this is now coming through finally, when you can see it, when you have things like AI architecture, where a lot of young people trying to kind of prompt and generate and be creative. 80% of this is parametricism.
What is parametricism?
Parametricism is the style we're working with. I think it's the architect's response to the computational era, where you can use algorithms, where you can evolve these very organic, well-fitting pieces of architecture. Parametricism builds on the phrase of parameters, so every element we work with has multiple parameters to allow these elements to adapt to each other, to form chains, but not chains of endless repetition, but chains of variation, of resonating, of connecting, of dependency networks. You can do parametric models where one element, when you add an element, everything else responds and interacts. It's a kind of magnetic field. You put something in, you add to the composition, everything else is reshuffling and reshaping to absorb that new element. That's the way we generate the methodology underpinning and the, let's say, the theoretical value system which underpins our work. The movement itself, the protagonists have deepened their knowledge, have integrated a lot of engineering intelligence increasingly, and some of the construction industry has way much adapted to it. For them, it's relatively easy. They have logistics capacities and CNC fabrication capacities. Now 3D printing is coming along, which makes it easier for sophisticated industry to translate, to create a building where you don't have 1,000 identical elements, but where every panel or piece of glass can be tailored and varied. That's where you can generate optimization, make buildings lighter, more light-footed. That still is an ongoing process, and I think this will finally come through and become what I call the epochal style of the 21st century, of the computational age.
And you talk about being on the right side of history when it comes to architecture. So if we were going to move into a chapter on failure, how are our cities failing us?
I do believe that cities are slow, and we can see that with the so-called affordability and housing crisis, that a lot of people feel the need, they want to participate in the labor market and in the job and career opportunities and educational opportunities in a city like London. But the supply isn't coming through because we have political barriers, we have NIMBYism, we have development slowdown, a lot of sites don't get permission, the density is relatively reduced, the units and the kind of spaces which planners allow are standards which may be outmoded. So there's a paralysis and slowdown. And it's also not fun for architects because there is an imposition of relatively old and very safe models. So if you look at what recently been built, it's all prescribed. For instance, which parcels are used for offices, for retail, for residences, the exact proportion when it comes to residences, how many of 4 bedrooms, 3 bedroom, 2 bedroom, actually prescribing every single facility and size of room, the required balcony, and then now constraining the size of the windows, there's very little creativity left for the developer to develop interesting products, but also for architects. And if you know that, you don't see I don't get the incentive to invest in new ideas, new technologies, because you can't express your creativity in these cities.
Why is that? I mean, you talk about politics. Is architecture always political? And do you think politics are a barrier to creativity then?
Yeah, I think there's too much of that in very mature cities where there is a risk averseness, where there's too many stakeholders who have a voice, which usually leads to prevention, because it's a bigger hurdle to line up many voices with a vision which is a little bit unusual. So the familiar gets an easier ride, but also smaller gets an easier ride than bigger. Less dense and less height gets an easier ride. The only exception is the City of London. That's why I think it's so fantastic, because here we have a different political process, some kind of accident of history that the old constitution, the medieval constitution of the freemen and the livery societies, to some extent are still kind of coming through, meaning the businesses and business association are in charge of the planning and the politics of the City of London. I myself a freeman of the City of London, and because it traditionally didn't have many residents, and the residents are in a minority. There's only people living in a Barbican. Let's say there's a 25,000 business and 9,000 residents, and the businesses somehow they go for more dynamism, more density, and of course they're also looking after these wonderful jewels they have. They can preserve them and yet build, and it's amazing, isn't it? Every time you kind of look back at the skyline, something new pops up.
But there are lots of people that would disagree with this idea that bigger is better, taller is better. How do you deal with criticism of some of those ideas?
I mean, the City of London, the walkie-talkie or the Leadenhall Tower, the G-Skeleton, I mean, these are fantastic spaces, lifting up, you can move underneath, open floor plates, panoramic elevator. While you're moving up, you can see what is happening in the city. And the density is important because you have now all these thousands of workers in the financial sector, legal sectors, and entrepreneurs also close by to the fintech clusters, etc. They can all walk to each other and go to the pub afterwards and go to XYZ events and meet at lunch. And, you have the stock market right there. So you get more critical mass of potentially mutually relevant, potentially collaborating, and at least information exchanging people into one dense condition. And I think that's very beneficial. You need these clusters. I mean, the Western is also actually dense for the media industry. So you have these kind of creative industry synergy clusters. We have Clerkenwell, where we have about 150 or 250 design shops and a lot of designers and architects, but it's less dense. And therefore it spreads out more. And we have to kind of then jump into a taxi to see our consultants. And that's friction. And that means wasting time. And that means also when they have a show up, I'm not going. Whereas in the City of London, I could just pop across the street and go.
You're rationalizing your ideas, and yet for some people, they're still considered quite controversial. Why?
I'm rationalizing in the sense of productivity. And productivity is something we should be aware. It's life-changing. You don't notice the difference between 0.5%, which we're living on now, or 0, and 5% in a year. 3.5%, 5%, you don't notice the 3.5%. But 10 years on, cumulatively, exponentially, it's life-changing. So it's a bit of a slow-cooked, frog sitting there, not noticing that potentials and the thrill of living through new dimension of prosperity is kind of leaking away from us. And that's a shame. I definitely see how much productivity gain we have made. And I think, isn't it wonderful if you're creative and productive and you can do more and there's progress? I think that's underestimated. So if some people think, well, but I simply love it to be a bit more quiet. They don't connect that up with them having the same standard of living 30 years on versus having double or triple, where they can then work half the time and have double of everything. that's necessarily bad for the planet because it is doubling value. It could be miniaturizing the elements. It could be also more light-footed. So I also think in terms of the greening, that's costly, and you need to be more productive to afford the greening and levels of comfort. And that's why I think productivity is very important. And we don't always recognize the amount of friction you can impose on a daily life, stuck in commuting. But it's not only that you waste these 3 hours, but you've therefore missed that evening event at your firm and all the inspiration and information which the next day you would have done better, you would have done other. So what I'm saying is, in the knowledge economy, all of us have to recalibrate what we're doing with what many others, or maybe everybody's doing. And that could be relatively fast evolving. I mean, let's look at AI now. I mean, you have to be continuously following and updating the new tools. And we have therefore research teams integrating, but they have to go to conference, they have to go to university, they have to browse around. And oftentimes, if you're in a hub where you accidentally run into each other, and in between that's why also the home working isn't quite working. We want everybody to come in because we're 500 people just amongst ourselves, and you need to make lunches together and breakfast and evenings and sessions and parties, so that the kind of mutual knowledge amongst the 500 is shared sufficiently so that everybody is updated with respect to any advance. And that's what you need space for. You need, it could be the metaverse in the future. I'm also working on that. But currently, if you just sit at home or in your isolated cubicle office, just focusing on what you're doing right now, that's a recipe for, missing out on a lot of innovation potentials. In the end, you might like this. You have a nostalgia. You live in the countryside. You miss out. Your career gets stunted. Your firm goes under. And you wonder, you don't know why it happened. You hampered yourself by your nostalgias.
Why is nostalgia a bad thing? Why is it a false sensibility? What if someone genuinely wants to go and live in a little cottage in the countryside? Is that such a bad thing?
Because you don't calculate the cost. So you might be relatively happy, but then you might have a lot of frustrations. Oh, why am I, my income is stagnating. Inflation is eroding my savings. I'm not getting these jobs. What happened to me? You might not connect that up. And as I said, it's not always perceptible. You don't notice so much the difference between a 1% and a 3%. On an annual basis, you don't notice. But if you multiply this by 25 times over 25 years, and we're still around, many of us in 25 years, you could really have something more thrilling to encounter and retire 10 years earlier, or you take a year out. So that's what I feel. The nostalgia is really preventing you from flourishing to the fullest of your potentials.
Mix Interiors is the leading platform for commercial interior design and architecture, in print and online. We feature the people shaping and reshaping the world around us. Explore the latest projects setting the bar for exceptional design, and showcase the products at the very forefront of innovation and creativity. For more information on how to subscribe in print or to view the latest digital content, head to mixinteriors.com. Patrik, you have views on how happiness intersects with architecture. You studied philosophy, which I find to be an interesting parallel. How does architecture and philosophy intersect?
I mean, as I said, we have to be on the right side of history. We need to understand where society is moving, or where the prosperity potentials are, in which societal arrangements, and how architecture could then fit in and contribute and enhance that. And for that, you need to kind of step back out of your immediate professional expertise. And so what you learn in philosophy is to think big, think principled, fundamental questions of direction. First of all, to say something like prosperity is so important, because prosperity is also freedom. I call it material freedom. Collectively, how do we establish this as a species, not to be kind of oppressed by a cold, indifferent, and potentially brutal universe. And of course, we have achieved collectively. I mean, it happened mostly through the 19th century. If you think about what I call the escape from the Malthusian trap, if you look at all previous history, there were a very small stratum of people who could lift themselves out of the drudgery and bone-breaking brutality and at the edge of poverty and starvation. And for many, many centuries, the average income was stagnating or going down. So, a peasant in the 18th century had actually was a smaller growth and a worse diet and much more hard work than a hunter and gatherer. And how did we escape? We escaped through productivity engines, through science, technology, capitalism, dynamizing a process, capitalism intersecting the science. The productivity gains could not be reabsorbed by population growth, because what you had before that, there was a bit more productivity. It was all kind of eaten up by growing the population, the additional capital. There was, 3 people on each shovel or hammer. You couldn't build up the capital, build up the innovation. But what happened in around 1800, the dynamics became suddenly so that you could grow the productivity faster than population. So and suddenly everybody could participate, and the large populations were no problem. Actually, was an advantage, because you can grow the capital and the tooling faster than the population, and everybody could escape. And now we're living in this world. I mean, instead of child labor from the age of 7, some of us only start to work properly at 25 or even late 20s. And yet, while they're learning, they can go online and have the idea, I'm flying to Australia tomorrow, and in 2 minutes they have the ticket, they go onto the flight, and that's amazing. That degree of freedom, that is and feel safe all the time, all of that is productivity gains. Not everybody is fully participating in this, but in the advanced countries, every citizen has a chance to participate in some of that. And I want, in my lifetime, first of all, I want architecture to participate more in it, and not say we are still building buildings we could have designed 80 years ago, but also we're slowing down this process. And I want to, hope to live another 30 years, whatever. And I want to live in a different world. I want to wake up or explore. And I would be very sad if 30 years on, things haven't changed.
You're working towards the creation of a certain type of future. And I wanted to ask you, do you think all opinions are equal? In a way, it takes us full circle back to that introduction where I say we all have a different version of what the future might look like. Why is yours the right one?
Well, because doesn't everybody want more for less? A good deal for their life where they make less effort. And I think everybody wants that. And if you look at migration streams, it's clear what people value. They value prosperity, where they have life chances. I mean, this is a universal thing. It was really in creature comforts, but as well also this urge to create. There's the anthropology, which I'm talking about. I think it's not only me, this kind of sense of restlessness. Aren't we getting bored if we don't progress? I think partly why we have reached so far as a species is because we have this restlessness. We want to do more, we're never satisfied, and we also want to show off to each other or want glory and recognition. And in architecture, I just think we have ideas, and I love it when cities want to upgrade themselves, when mayors come to us and say, help us, and then they do a competition, or new countries, like Azerbaijan or something like Dubai, where the Arab world for the first time has a sensation. Wow, we are first world. We can do something fantastic which outshines London or something. And I love that sense of exploration, that thrill. And of course, maybe not everybody 100% agrees, but I think it touches a nerve with many and most people. And when you then also bring it down home to prosperity, in a sense that a more dignified retirement, where you don't have to now we're talking about winter fuel allowance, that we can't heat our homes for I don't know how much percentage of the pensioners is. I mean, nobody wants that. So that's why I'm focusing on prosperity, and it's insufficiently emphasized. Because yes, you want to redistribute and everybody wants to be part of it, but we need to generate these levels of prosperity. And I think architecture but it's also a thrill in itself. I mean, it's really also, I just wanted to be part of something which was self-transcending every decade. And the human project is a thrill. It's a story I want to live through. I'm curious about. And how boring would it be if I would time travel in 50 years and nothing has changed?
And you said as architects, we have ideas. What is the biggest idea, the greatest idea that ZHA has given the world?
Wow. Well, I mean, it's yet to come. It's yet to be delivered. So let's say there's a dream of a city, a dream of a building. And maybe I can try to tell you what it is. So first of all, it's the complexities. It's the effortlessness of bringing thousands of people into a process where they meet each other, exchange ideas. And this is shifting between intimate one-to-ones to smaller groups. You also want to be part of a larger group and feel the spirit of as somebody speaking to 500 people, and you're all kind of soaring, sense of collective pride. And for that, you need a very kind of intricate and complex environment. The architecture need to facilitate that. That's why you go into the building, you need to take a panoramic elevator to see what happens on all floors. Hey, I want to go there. Stop. Everything needs to become mutually transparent and be quickly accessible. That's why we need the density, we need the hollowing out of vistas into visibility. The thing is this, so there's this very, very vastly differentiated panoply of types of spaces, types of characters, types of personalities. We need to dress up. You can gauge a crowd. Well, this guy looks interesting. And you can see where people are coming from. So we need the design to self-design, so we find our potential collaborators in the crowd quickly, and also for the occasion, what you're emphasizing. And that is all design. What kind of space offers what kind of environment, what kind of people? You need to be able to see that. And for that, the built environment has to be speaking. It needs to be eloquent. The clues you get where something is, what the lighting conditions are, what the elements are, and the colors and mood and mode, that this has more meaning. And right now, we have a kind of fragmented architectural discipline, and people arbitrarily design. It has no meaning. It doesn't signify anything. So my dream of the city and of the built environment is that everything reveals itself intuitively, and I can take it in. I don't have to read labels or look at my phone to find and type in. No, I want to browse and grasp what is this. And they need to be well ordered and clustered in ways which at the moment politics prevents. Politics doesn't allow the free clustering of facilities. That's the dream, and that you can navigate it and understand it like you understand a language. The city becomes much more self-revealing to all of us, empowering all of us to make the most of the city.
Well, Patrik, the podcast is called Things I've Learned. So round us out with the greatest lesson that you have learned.
Well, first of all, I'm learning all the time. Philosophy, I've studied it, but I've kept reading and learning and finding out and getting inspired to upgrade what we're doing. So it's an ongoing learning. Things I've learned. I mean, currently I'm learning a lot about the metaverse. We have just founded a Utopia metaverse for the design ecosystems for all architects, industrial designers, fashion designers, magazines and conferences and biennales together in a virtual kind of design world. And some that could substitute for some of the things which the politicians don't allow us to build in the real. So I do include the metaverse design fully within the ambit of architecture. But I've also learned that it's not instant. There was a huge hype on Meta, and there was a kind of stock market hype and related crypto hype, and then it takes a little longer. But we have to live with these hypes and troughs, and yet in the next 5 to 10 years, this will be an avalanche of work, of excitement, of productivity gains. And I've learned that I have to be observing those phenomena, these trends, get onto the track, and then be patient. Know what you're looking for, learn the technical details, the information, and then stay your course. There's no guarantee, but I am kind of 95% certain that the metaverse is coming, that we will be riding that wave during my lifetime, and it will be glorious.
It's been a big conversation, Patrik, as I imagined it would be, because that's always how I've thought of Zaha Hadid. Big ideas, big projects, world building. But I think my greatest takeaway from this conversation is actually that it all comes down to people, and that you think on a very human scale, that your work isn't about grandiosity. It's about making our lives better and more prosperous. It's not all about how we live. It's about the quality of those lives. So thank you. Thank you for listening to Things I've Learned. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you like, subscribe, and of course, recommend us to your friends. We also film these conversations, so if you want to see us as well as hear us, head over to our website, mixinteriors.com. This is the last episode of our first season. So if you've joined us for all 6 episodes, thank you. I hope you found these conversations as inspiring and thought-provoking as I have. If you missed any, the full season is now live, of course, wherever you normally listen to your podcasts, and we will be back later this year with Season 2. Things I've Learned is hosted by me, Harry McKinley. This episode was produced by Nada Smiljanic, and the executive producer was Dan Jackson, with original music by Memotone. Things I've Learned is a co-production by Reduce Listening and Mix Interiors.